I want to talk about, I've been meaning to do this for a while. I was out of town for Thanksgiving visiting the parents in New Mexico, if you follow me on social media. I want to talk about the Senate organization, which has happened last week. It's a very clear supermajority, 17 members. And then I want to talk about the House, which is, again, very far from being able to organize a majority because of not just the election results, where it's basically split 2020. There's 21 Republicans, including Louise Stutes, who's the current speaker, who's been in bipartisan majorities for 6 years. But also there's 3 House races that are kind of being challenged or up in the air right now because of 2 involving litigation and 1 that's going to go to a recount. So I'm gonna check the stream here. I always check to make sure we're all good here, because that's important. Is that working? Let me just make sure here we go. It is working. So we're all watching. So if you pay attention to all this stuff, we actually live streamed. I had Kale do some great work last week. Did me a favor. He was at the Senate Majority organizational announcement, which was Friday after Thanksgiving at the Anchorage Legislative Information Office. And this was pretty much known for a while. There was a few races they were waiting on the results of. One was the Kathy Giessel race, which she won. She was the leader of. That was a very divided race. They almost all had a third. Her and Rosalind Casey, Democrat, and Roger Holland, Republican incumbent. Jesse Bjorkman, Tuckerman Babcock, Andy Cizik race. Bjorkman was ahead. He remained ahead. And then David Wilson with Stephen Wright and Clayton, I think Scott Clayton. So he maintained his lead. So all 3 people who were in the lead maintained their lead, but they were waiting to announce before the tabulation occurred. And it was basically, after the election, it was clear there was going to be a bipartisan coalition in the Senate. With the 9 Democrats, the Democrats went from 7 to 9. They picked up Matt Clayman and Forrest Dunbar. So they went from 7 to 9. And then with Bert Stedman, Gary Stevens, and Click Bishop, the 3 Republicans that are kind of the 3 amigos, that was already 12. So they already had a clear kind of bipartisan or a majority of 12. But what was clear, people like James Kaufman, David Wilson, Kathy Giessel, Jesse Bjorkman. We're going to pull the list up here of the people in the majority and show the names. The last 4 years have been really contentious in the Senate. Mike Shower was screaming about the binding caucus, made it sound like it was some corrupt, deal. It was like the FBI was investigating them, probably because he reported them. That's the only thing that makes sense. Shelley Hughes was in the majority. She was majority leader, but they were voting against the budget. They were rolling the finance chairs. They were creating all these problems, and people just had enough of it. They were done. So you went from a 13-member Republican majority with Lyman Hoffman, so 12 in Lyman Hoffman, with a pretty decent minority of 7 Democrats, which really the real majority in the Senate for the last several years has been half the majority, and then most of the Democratic minority when it comes to passing the budget, getting the dividend figured out. It's been really contentious. And these people, Bert Stedman, Gary Stevens, Click Bishop, and Kathy Giessel was there before in 2019 and 20. She was Senate president. So she saw it, and people were just, tired of it. They were tired of all the bullshit. Kelly Merrick went from the House to the Senate. She was a 21st vote for Louise Stutes back in 2021, and she took a bunch of flack for that in the kind of circle, in the bubble, but she parlayed that up into a almost 60%, 58% victory against Ken McCarty. So I'm going to pull this up here. Let's see if this looks here. So this is a Senate. This is my little thing I'm using. Let me see if I can zoom on that. This is my little chart that I made. So this is the winners, and then we can kind of see who's in the coalition, but let's just sort it by party. So we have, Republicans have 11 members, Democrats have 9 members. But when you break it down here, you have Stedman, Stevens, Bjorkman, Giessel, Kaufman, Merrick, Wilson, Bishop. These are all in the new majority, bipartisan majority. So there's 17 members. So the only people who are in the minority are Shower, Hughes, where's Hughes here? Hughes and Myers. Now, the way it works in the rules, the way the legislature functions, you have to have a quarter, at least a quarter of the membership of the either House or Senate to be a recognized minority, which means basically the rules recognize you as a minority. You get certain number of committee seats on certain committees based on the size, staffing, all these different things. They only have 3 in the minority. They're too short. Now, I'm sure the majority will give them some staff points. They'll probably even let them on a few committees. But the Finance Committee, which is comprised of 7 people, a very powerful Senate Finance Committee, none of the minority members are on the Finance Committee. So it's all majority members. Now, it's split. Donnie Olson's on there, Lyman Hoffman, Click Bishop, Kelly Merrick, Jesse Keel. So it's split kind of, I think it's 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats. So while the minority are going to probably be given some staff and some committee, they aren't going to have really any influence, any say in the outcome. It's a last time we saw this was in 2012, that election. There was a bipartisan coalition, which in 2013 got broken up. So the last 10 years, it's been Republican controlled, with kind of Lyman Hoffman being mostly part of those Senate Republican majorities. But before that, from 2006, 2012, there was large bipartisan coalitions in the Senate of 15 or 16 members. Now, which means that when it was 16, and funny enough, the old, before the coalition got broken up in 2012, after that election, there was like a 4-member superminority of Kathy Giessel, John Coghill, Fred Dyson, Con Bundy. So Kathy Giessel, who was Senate President, 4 years ago, for 2 years. Before that, many years ago, she was in the kind of super minority. Now she's in the new majority because even she realized how crazy this shit got. So there was a while ago, a 4-member, a small minority of not recognized. They still gave them some positions and kind of gave them some seats and recognized them, but it wasn't, nothing got done. So now 10 years later, Democrats have picked up 2 seats and you have a big supermajority in the Senate, everybody except Senator Mike Shower, Senator Shelley Hughes, Senator Rob Myers. And so next year, look for the Senate to be very orderly, very normal, kind of figure the adults are in charge. And it's not going to be what we've seen the last 4 years. It's going to be very different. The House now is a whole nother situation. And I want to spend some time talking about the House. Now, let me pull this up here so we can take a look. So this is the House, my chart. So as you can see, the House, if we go to R, we have 21. Now, all of these people except Louis Stutes are basically what I'm calling kind of, likely to be in the coalition, Republican majority. So we have Stutes, who's been Speaker the last 2 years. Before that, she was in the coalition. Of these other 20, we have Sarah Vance, very conservative, Justin Ruffridge. He's new. He beat Ron Gillum. Hard to say with him. He's maybe a bit of a wild card, depending how things shake out. Ben Carpenter, very conservative. Laddie Shaw, very conservative. Craig Johnson, former legislator. He was rules chair. He was in a majority before, but he's been gone since 2016, so he's not been around. Some of these other people like Carpenter and Cronk and McCabe and some of these, Laddie Shaw, the guys that have been around for Kathy Tilton, Delana Johnson, I'm not sure how happy they're going to be to welcome in Craig Johnson and Dan Sadler, who have been gone for 4 and 6 years, and say, well, come on in. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. So that could be a bit of a dynamic. Julie Colomb, actually in Landmine Book Club, she's great, smart, but also very conservative. So she's almost certainly not going to be in a coalition. Now, Tom McKay, this is one of the races. He's right now leading Democrat Denny Wells, by 7 votes. So that's going to go. I'm told Wells is going to file a request for recount, which, because the margin's so narrow, the state will pay for that. So that's one race. When we saw Bart LeBon and Catherine Dodge after the 2018 election go to a recount, that race wasn't decided until early January. So it's likely this is not going to be decided for a month. So it's going to be hanging out there as one variable in a very already narrowly kind of split House. Stanley Wright, he's a new legislator. He beat Ted Escheid. Jamie Allard. If you follow Jamie on the Assembly and watch what goes on, you know how kind of disruptive and combative she is. Not just with people she doesn't agree with, but people she agrees with sometimes. She turns on Dave Bronson. She gets very emotional. She screams and yells, and that behavior is not going to be tolerated in Juneau. I don't even know if the Republicans are going to be able to contain her. So that's another variable and factor in this Republican type attempt to organize. Dan Sadler, we talked about. He's a former legislator. He came back. Elena Johnson, Palmer, conservative. Kathy Tilton, conservative. Now Eastman's also, this race, it's also contested because of the litigation over the Oath Keepers, his membership in the Oath Keepers. But even, and I don't think this will happen. I do think he'll prevail. But even if Eastman doesn't prevail, even if the court says he's ineligible, the court said Stu Graham, the second place finisher, would take over. So that's still going to be a Republican seat. If Eastman stays, which I think he will, that's going to be another barrier for organization, because the last several times Eastman has been in the way and prevented organization when it's been very, very narrow like this, because he won't kind of play ball with other Republicans on deciding on a majority and rules and budget vote. Jesse Sumner, new, but he's on the Matsu Borough Assembly. Reasonable guy. He came out against the Sabrina Combs recall, which was very stupid. So he might be another, wild. I don't know. Couldn't tell you for sure, but he's somebody that could maybe potentially be a wild card. George Rauscher, been there a while, legislator from Sutton. Kevin McCabe, been there, second term now. He's trying to put something together, but we're going to talk about this in a second. The more you try to get with Republicans and bring over a few of these other people, like Josiah Pocketok would be one, potentially, I'm not saying they would even do this, but if they were to get Dan Ortiz, an independent, make him co-chair, maybe Neil Foster, I'm not even saying they would do that. If that were to even be a topic, some of the other very conservative Republicans would be against that, and they would want to stop it. So this is where it gets very dicey. Will Stapp, Fairbanks, new. Mike Prox, been there for a little bit, North Pole, and then Frank Tomaszewski is new, took over the Grier-Hopkins seat, Mike Cronk. So those are the kind of Republicans. The 21, and when you include Stutz, I don't know what Stutz is going to do. I mean, she's been with the coalition for 6 years. She's speaker under the coalition. I have a hard time. I think it's impossible to assume or think that Louise Stutz will be in a 21-member majority with David Eastman and Jamie Allard and some of these folks that have been really rough on her the last couple of years. But we're going to talk about some of the other factors here. So now we have the independent Democrats, which number 19. So we got Dan Ortiz, who's an independent, but he's forever been with kind of the coalition and with the Democrats. But I mean, he could be somebody that maybe under the right circumstances could be persuaded. But like I said, you start to bring over more independents or even progressives or Democrats to a Republican organization. Some of the very conservative Republicans are going to object to that, and they're not going to allow it. You have to have 21 votes to get a speaker. After you do that, normally this stuff's all worked out. All the rules chair and the finance positions and the all these chairs of these committees is worked out. With when Stutz got elected after a month of not organizing after the 2020 election, they didn't have anything worked out. It was kind of like, we'll figure it out. It was kind of a mess. The same thing happened after the 2018 election. They weren't able to make a majority after the election. Republicans tried to, it didn't work. Then after a month into session in 2019, the coalition was able to get like Chuck Kopp and Jennifer Johnston and Louise Stutz, and they formed a majority. So Dan Ortiz, Kelvin Schrage, independent, I don't think would maybe, anything's possible, but you got to think these people have been together for the last majority, and they kind of really stuck it out. So there's some bonding and there's some relationships that, but something will shake loose. If it doesn't organize by the first day of session, once it goes, eventually something's going to crack loose. Lise Galvin, independent, but very progressive, ran twice against Don Young. Bryce Edgman, he's trying to put something together. He was speaker for 4 years, but he's made enemies and he's upset some people in his own caucus and Republicans. So I don't know if Bryce at this point could even get 21 votes because of some of the bad blood that's happened over the last several years. Now here's the big factor. The biggest wild card is Josiah Pocketok. He's been in there since 2020. He's been in the majority. He was resources chair. Very pro-resource development, Anwar, oil and gas. He could easily be persuaded to go with the Republicans under the right circumstances, but I don't think he's going to go into a majority of 21 Republicans that includes Jamie Allard and Jamie Allard and David Eastman. I think he would need to get something else would have to go on, and also his position. But when you look at the Democrats too, he's pro-resource development. When you look at people like Genevieve Mina, Elise Galvin, I think he could have some real problems with some of these people's views on Anwar, for example, or resource development. So this is another dynamic that's important. So Rebecca Himschoot, Democrat, took over for JKT. I don't see her, crossing over. Andy Story, Democrat from Juneau. Sarah Hannon, same thing, Democrats from Juneau. Andy Josephson was able to beat Kathy Hensley. I don't see him doing anything. Now, Jenny Armstrong, she's now facing another residency challenge that was filed today. So this is based on some landmine reporting from when she moved here and when she's a resident. And if I think she, based on her own history and based on her own statements, I don't think she's been a resident long enough to be eligible. It's 3 years residency based on the last Constitution. When she filed, by her own admission, which I think she was wrong about, but even if you take her word for it, she was only eligible by about 10 days. But the division doesn't look into that. They just take people's word for it. So that's another kind of up in the air, that what's going to happen with this race. So that's another thing that's going to have to be litigated. Zach Fields, Democrat. Cliff Crow, Democrat. Genevieve Mina, extremely progressive, was a staffer with the Young Democrats. They aren't doing anything with Republicans. I mean, maybe they take a few over, like the coalition, but they aren't going to cross over the other side. Andrew Gray, very outspoken in the assembly meetings, Democrat. It's not going to do anything. I mean, when I say not do anything, I mean, they aren't going to cross over and they aren't going to join 21 Republicans to form a majority. Donna Mears, don't know much about her, but Democrat, beat Forrest Wolf, was lucky to win, squeaked it out. I don't think you expect her to do anything with crossing over with the Republicans. Maxine Diebert, same thing. Ashley Carrick, very progressive, was a staffer. C.J. McCormick, I don't know much about him. He's new, younger, from Bethel. I couldn't really tell you, but I based on what I've heard, he's wouldn't entertain anything with Republican. But I don't know. It's rural Bethel. It's hard to tell you. I don't know him that well. And then Neil Foster, who was for many years in the Republican majority until the last 6 years, he's been in the coalition and finance co-chair. So this is the inherent problem: is you need 21, but even when you have 21. It's really rough because any one of those 21 members can veto and stop things, big things like the budget, if it's a dividend, whatever it could be. So you really need to get to 23 or 24 to have a little breathing room. And with 21 Republicans right now, Louise Stutes being one of them, who I don't really put into the Republican camp as far as a solid number to organize. Then you have Tom McKay. That race is going to go to recount. This David Eastman thing, that's litigation. And then you have the Jenny Armstrong, which if Armstrong is deemed ineligible, there's, my understanding, two options. One, they would have Dunleavy, because she was certified the winner. Dunleavy would pick a Democrat to replace her, which, if that were to happen, we saw in 2018, Nancy Dahlstrom won, but then she stepped down for an Eagle River seat to become corrections commissioner. Dunleavy appointed Sharon Jackson. Because the House hadn't organized, Sharon Jackson wasn't able to get seated, and there was a whole fight over that, because you have to get recognized, approved by the Republicans. If it's a Republican person who dies or resigns or steps out, the governor appoints a Republican. The majority of Republicans in the House have to confirm them. Same thing if it's a Democrat. So there was a whole thing about they hadn't organized, they weren't going to seat her. So if Armstrong is deemed ineligible and then Dunleavy picks a Democrat, that could be another barrier for organization. The other option is the court could say, this is less likely, I think, the court could say, Armstrong was never an eligible candidate, Liz Vasquez is the winner. Now, that's, I think, the least likely scenario if she's deemed ineligible, but if that were to happen, that would give Republicans another vote, and that would change the whole dynamic. So at this point, with these races under review and litigation, I think we're going to go back to the last 2 years after the 2018 and 2020 election, where it's first day of session, there's going to be no organization, they're going to meet, the lieutenant governor is going to start it, they're going to at some point pick up a speaker pro tem, and they're going to, every day, do we have votes for a speaker? Do we have motions? 2020, 2020, 2020, 20, and then eventually somebody will crack, because something has to shake loose at some point. But it's even whenever a majority does form, it's not going to be more than 23 if they're lucky. It's probably going to be 21 or 22. So unlike the Senate, where you have a very tiny super minority of 3 people, that's not even a recognized minority, in the House, you're going to have a big minority, a powerful minority, who are going to have extra seats on committees, a lot more than if it was a 15 or 10 member minority. They're going to have the ability to stop this 2/3 vote and 3/4 vote, procedural votes for certain thresholds, for suspending rules or for drawing savings or for just all these little procedural. The Senate has, you need 15 for a 3/4 vote, 14 for a 2. I mean, they have 17. They can do whatever they want. Senate's cruising. Now they're going to have fights amongst themselves. I mean, the 17 members, but when it comes to key issues, social issues, if those come up, or even the budget, even the dividend, I mean, but they do have a rule. The Senate does have a rule. They've all agreed to vote for the final version of the budget. So that's a good thing, because Schauer has been screaming about that. But what Schauer doesn't seem to understand or realize is when you don't have an agreement on not every vote, not every throughout the process, every vote, but the last vote, like when the whole thing's done, when they've crafted the budget, if you don't have that agreement, we saw what happened last time where they spin the budget up, or they shoot the budget up $1 billion plus on the floor because it's chaos and there's no control. So when you have this idea that it's a free for all, anybody can do it, that you don't have the obligation or the promise to vote on the final version of the budget, spending goes up. Actually, spending increases. It doesn't decrease; it increases. So the Senate's like, they're going to have fights on, dividend probably, and some social issues, culture wars. That's going to come up, but they're all basically kind of adults and reasonable. So I don't see it going sideways. I mean, there'll be some fights. It's politics. There's going to be some battles, but it's really going to be, I think, very smooth for the most part. 17 members. They can even have 2 members gone. They can be out of town or sick, and they can still do whatever they want. I mean, the minority has no power in the state Senate. 3 members, no power. 0. They can talk. That's all they can do, is they can talk. The House, though, even if you get 22 or 23 in the majority, whoever it is, Republicans or Democrats, Independents, coalition, you're going to have a huge minority. The 2/3 vote threshold in the House is 27. The 3/4 vote is 30. And we've seen this the last several years, how it's been so tough to get some of these crucial votes at the end. And it's horse trading, it's pressure, it's very intense. So we're going to go from the Senate being the crazy place the last 4 years to the House being crazy, but still, end of the day, they coalition came together and got it done. They didn't fall apart. So while the House was still a little crazy, end of the day, the coalition came together and they powered through it, didn't break up, and they passed the budget, and they did their work. But the House is going to be nuts. It's going to be really wild. A lot of new people, a lot of emotions. The Republicans have Jamie Allard and David Eastman and some other very conservative people. The Democrats have Genevieve Mina and Andrew Gray, who's very loud, progressive voices that I don't know how they're going to deal with being in, especially when these social issues come up or these kind of culture war issues. So, Bryce Edgman and Andy Josephson, don't have this kind of woke view of the world like Genevieve Mina and maybe Ashley Carrick and Andrew Gray. So it's just they have their own set of issues. Both sides have their issues. And I think to maybe best summarize it is if you look at these Republican or these 40 House members, no matter how you shake it, it's really hard to get 21 adult, people that are just reasonable, rational people who can figure shit out. Now, Matt Clayman, Kelly Merrick, James Kaufman, they were all people that are reasonable, that could come, figure shit out. They all went to the Senate. Jonathan Christ Tompkins, Chris Tuck, Sarah Rasmussen, they're all out. So you have all these new people coming to the House, a lot of new people. It's like 17 new people who have never served, who've never been there before. Now, some of them have been in local government, but it's just going to be a very big learning curve, and it's going to be, for me, it's going to be great. For my business, for my purposes, it's going to be great. It's going to be very loose. It's going to be wild. There's going to be who even knows how it's going to go. Every year and every session gets weirder and different and crazier. So that's kind of the breakdown. Just a big summary here is Senate's organized. They have 17-member supermajority. They're going to have battles over issues. They're going to have, it's going to, of course, it's politics, but the Senate's good. There's not going to be any major problems. It's not going to be chaotic. It's going to be very normal. The House, whatever ends up shaking out, is going to be pretty crazy. That's basically the gist of it. I don't think the House is going to organize till session starts, probably well into session. Anything could happen. It just takes a few people to make a decision. But I think until you get everybody in the room and you have to build that pressure like in a pressure cooker to force someone to do something. That's what I think it's going to take. So that's kind of the breakdown. It's December. We're about 6 weeks till session starts. It's, the inauguration's on Monday, by the way. We're going to be there. We're going to be there live. We're going to be live streaming the inauguration. It's at the Alaska Airlines Center on Monday at 1 p.m. It's open to the public. So it's the governor being sworn out. Later, I'm going to talk about kind of the governor at a future live stream, the governor's, how he's going to function with the Senate, the way it is, the coalition in the House, whatever that ends up being, and how he works with them and how he advances his agenda. and what's going to be a split government. So that's kind of the breakdown. If you like the show, if you like the landmine, please consider making a donation. You can go to alaskalandmine.com/donate. You can do a one-time monthly recurring donation, a one-time donation. You can buy an ad if you have a business or an organization or a cause. We sell ads. We really appreciate your support. So that's the breakdown. Check us out Monday for the inauguration, and then we'll be watching the House very closely. And holidays coming up, it's going to be a little bit of a downslope. Kind of a what would you say? It's going to be a kind of a smooth coasting till January, and then as soon as after the 1st, it's going to really kind of accelerate and spin up and get wild as everybody gets ready to go to Juneau and session starts. So that's the breakdown. That's the House, Senate. That's dynamic. It's going to be something else to see how it all breaks down in the House. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next live stream here with Jeff Landfield from the Alaska Landmine.